Right. Thank you all for coming. Start with some introductions. This is a reminder for me to record. I am recording, so like don't say anything that you would want on the internet. In terms of introductions, so right now we've got two thesis writers who are going to tell you about their experiences. Sam Miller's here. Sam's double in finance econ. You want to get like the standard Notre Dame introduction?
Sure, yeah. So senior living off campus now, but I was in St. Edward's Hall, finance and econ from Perrysburg, Ohio. That covers it. Yeah.
Tell us what your thesis is about, just in
one
sentence.
In one sentence, I'm investigating the impact of a Whole Foods or Trader Joe's opening on gentrification in their surrounding communities.
Cool. Macy Owens is going to join us hopefully shortly. Yeah, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, and I am Professor Casey Buckles. So I'm currently teaching econometrics, but relevant for tonight, next fall, I will be teaching the senior thesis workshop where we give you tools and things to help you get on the right foot with your thesis and also give you a community of other thesis writers.
Yeah, I know most of you. So I'm Forrest Spence, for those of you I don't know. Been here since 2015, faculty in the econ department. I'm the director of the undergrad program. It's like I get a bunch of emails. Yeah.
Around this time of year?
Yeah. All right.
I'm going to sit and eat pizza while you do
your
slides, but I'll be.
Sam, do you want to basically, we brought a couple students here just so they could share their experiences in terms of like how they found their thesis topic, what are they working on, and then sort of like I want you to like put on your econ hat for a second and kind of talk about like some of the pros and cons in terms of doing the thesis.
Yeah. So just starting with how I found my topic after I like kind of decided to do the thesis. I settled on I took economics of housing with Professor Mast, and I got like really into kind of the housing space within econ. And then I had still no idea what I wanted to write about. This was probably April or May. So I started reaching out to professors. I reached out to Professor Mast first. And he was already full, but he sent me a couple people, other professors that he knew had available space to advise, that also worked in a similar econ of housing realm. And so I got kind of paired with Professor Matthias Holzlein. His last name always escapes me. But we met over the summer, via Zoom, and started chatting about potential topics. And so I knew I wanted to do something in the space. And then he kind of sent me some general ideas about things that he had kind of on his back burner within the realm, and readings associated with those. And one of those that I ended up really being into was this topic about Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. What next? General pros and cons. So then you start the workshop in the fall with Professor Buckles. And at this point, I think people are still kind of dropping, and not everybody's certain right at the beginning of the year that they want to do it. But it's been a super rewarding opportunity to not only just be in intermediate micro with Professor Spence and learn a lot and get all these tools, but to actually get a chance to apply them. And then in their electives, you kind of read a bunch of papers and get a sense for the conversation going on. And this is your first chance as an undergrad, which is kind of rare, to add to that conversation and create your own content and work, which I thought was super meaningful and rewarding. Challenges. I think everybody in this room is fully capable of writing a good thesis. One of the biggest challenges for me is part of the optionality is difficult. It's you're opting into a whole bunch of work senior year. So to be very real, sometimes Tuesday or Wednesday when I'm headed to the library to work on my thesis, my friends are headed to go play trivia or something. And so that can be challenging. So you just kind of have to ask yourself how bad you want it. So I've never really wavered in that I want to complete this because I think it's a really cool opportunity. But those are like some things to think about. But I don't think like any of the technical, like if you're worried about like having the technical skills to do it, I think there are resources out there. Your advisor will be a huge help. So, you know, if you want it and you want to put the work in, you're definitely going to be able to do it.
Yeah, we're going to touch on a bunch of those things as we go. So like, how do you find an advisor? And this like idea of like being able to kind of like push information forward, which is a super cool thing. We'll just get Macy to like hop in whenever she gets
Yeah, she can wrap up.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we have 4 maybe more reasons that are basically just going to hit on some of the things that Sam said, and maybe add a little bit to them. So the first thing is spend enough time and thought on a problem, become an expert on your topic. And like I don't know, when I left undergrad, I very much felt like I had been exposed to a whole lot of different things. And I had learned a lot about like what I did know about the world, but I didn't know a lot about anything very specifically. Like a thesis is like a way to like concretely commit to doing that for a year. I'm becoming like an expert in a topic. And like, you know, the word expert gets thrown around a lot. What we need is like, you know, as long as you are doing a topic that you're engaged in and you do the work, like you will leave here knowing a whole lot about something in particular, whether it's housing or, you know, whether there's a wide variety of different types of topics. And that involves like this process of like, okay, figuring out first, like, it's like, just like looking at related literature and sort of seeing like, what do we know about housing markets and gentrification and things like that. And I assume that that's like a core piece of the fall workshop.
Exactly, yes. So Sam came in maybe with a better idea of what he wanted to do than most students, which really benefited him, the work that he did over the spring and summer. But most students come in saying, you know, I want to do something on labor or something about poverty or something about education. And we use those first weeks of the fall semester to really turn that into a specific question that you can write a thesis about.
The most questions I get of like specifically about the thesis process is like, how do I find an advisor? How do I find a topic? And maybe one of the reasons why that's like such a common question is because there isn't like one tried and true way to do any of those things. Like there's a variety of different things, and we'll kind of talk about those specifically as we go. And so that's one thing. This could be a pro or a con. Regular interaction with a faculty member is like something that, you know, so especially from my perspective, like I teach these gigantic classes for like principles of micro and intermediate micro. I mean, even my labor elective like has like 40 to 60 people in it. And so like, it's nice for me from the faculty perspective to like be able to have like more one-on-one engagement with a particular student. And like that, there's things that happen with like a regular interaction with a faculty member that just like don't occur if you are just like one of 60 people or 30 people in an elective. Basically, you grab some pizza and then we'll get you to give a shout out about what you're doing.
Yeah, and so I'll add to that, since Macy is now here, I am advising Macy's thesis. And I'm going to be writing a letter of recommendation for her as she applies to medical school over the summer. And I have so much more information. I can be much more specific about Macy and all of the wonderful things I'm going to say about her than I could if she was one of the, 80 students in my econometrics class this semester. So, we know that economics is a big major, that has pluses and minuses, I think, but one of the minuses can be that you don't often get a chance to, get to know one particular faculty member and have them get to know you really well. And the thesis will definitely give you that chance.
Third, learn how to conduct independent research to examine a question in depth or test a hypothesis. Oftentimes what you're doing in your electives, or certainly in the core courses, is like you're working on problem sets, right? Like we are like a problems based major. In electives, like you're encouraged to do more independent topics, and in metrics, I don't know if you guys have like a research project.
We do. We're just starting it.
Yeah, but like that's a skill that like for lots of us has to be learned in terms of like what are the steps to like actually independently go through and do all the steps necessary to come from like start of like I have this question or this thing I'm interested in to ultimately then being able to kind of go through all the steps and sort of saying okay, here's something here, let me like actually shed light on what this particular thing is. And even if you don't want to go to grad school, if you don't want to go into academia, like this is the stuff that I was about to say this very confidently, but actually I'm not as confident anymore. I was like, 3 is the stuff that ChatGPT can't do. Those are the things that you should be like learning those skills, but actually like maybe that's not exactly true. I don't know.
It can't do it yet.
Okay, yeah. But like as you're thinking about like what are like some tangible takeaways that you're gonna be able to like bring to your job or whatever it is later, like this is one of them. This is a process of like learning how to like independently go about doing research. That's like an invaluable skill, no matter what organization you're gonna be working with.
Yeah, and it's tangible in the sense that you will have a paper at the end of it.
Yeah,
so very often employers or graduate programs or things will ask for a writing sample. And so you'll have something that hopefully you'll be really proud of that shows like substantial work and knowledge and good writing.
That's right. And again, like writing is not something we necessarily get you to practice much. And actually, you know, you can get through the econ major. So suppose, you know, you take econometrics, and you get through the econ major without doing much more in terms of applying econometrics if you're strategic about what electives you take. Like this is for the majority of you, if you end up doing a thesis, majority of theses are like very analytical and quantitatively driven. It's like you ultimately get much better at stata, or, you know, at least at like doing applied econometrics. And that's something that I think I oftentimes will talk to students and they will tell me like after they take a 43,000 level class, like, oh, I didn't actually understand econometrics until after I took a course, you know, where I got to like apply all the things that we learned in that course. It's nothing against the teaching of econometrics, it's just the nature of like learning difficult things. Yeah, and then along those lines, like writing is important. And we as a major, like this isn't poli-sci or something like that, where like you have to do a whole bunch of writing. Also, if you're being strategic, you probably get out of this major without too much writing at all. But this is something that's like worth thinking about practicing. Macy, do you wanna, now that you got a mouthful of pizza, you wanna introduce yourself?
Yeah, you caught me wrong. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna chew real quick. This is embarrassing.
I'll go to the next slide. More on just benefits, like, you know, in terms of thinking about like your training as an economist as you get out of here. There's something to be said about going down this path and like the uniqueness of this relative to just like doing what you've done for the past 15 years or so, which is like taking courses and like grinding through assignments and things like that. Yeah, I don't know, like this all sounds kind of like cliche and fluffy to me, but like, I don't know, like Sam and Macy, like, do you feel like accomplished now that you are hopefully very close to the end?
Yeah, no, I think one other thing that kind of popped in my mind too, as you were talking about like jobs, is that I think I talked about it in like every one of my interviews this fall. And I'm doing investment banking, which is like totally unrelated to econ, but that was,
Well, not totally.
not totally.
I know what you mean.
It's been mentioned on every single program I've applied to. Every single person is like, oh, you're doing a thesis, like, tell me about that. And especially because like I am applying to medical school, it's not often that they see like students who have a more like humanities research orientation. So that's been something I can point to as kind of a way that like sets me apart is approaching medicine from like an economic background. It's just a more of a non-traditional path to that. So every single program I've been applying to recently has been like, tell us about this. What does this mean? Why did you choose this topic? And I feel like there's very like tangible skills that I can point to that I've learned through writing a thesis that will hopefully like bring me through a future career.
What is your thesis on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at a specific policy that was implemented in Texas in 2011 that kind of like reduced federal and state funding for family planning programs and services. And so what I'm looking at though, the outcomes are prenatal healthcare access. So whether that increased, decreased, who can access prenatal healthcare, and the infant and maternal outcomes that resulted because of that change in access. So I'm interested in going into career in maternal medicine. So I was really like when looking for topics focused on like maternal healthcare, and that we kind of, you know, concern that topic together. So
how'd you find an advisor? Like, how did ultimately like you go with?
So I went and like looked through all the professors here on like the Econ website. It'll often like list y'all's kind of like interests, and I went through papers too. A lot of times like faculty will have their CVs, and so I like kind of found like keywords, maybe professors who had like done a lot of health economics, family economics, which is what I kind of the intersection. And so Professor Buckles is pretty heavily involved in family and health economics. So I was like, I figured that would be a good advisor to reach out to, and she said yes. So
yeah, and we will share with you a spreadsheet that has all of the faculty who are available as advisors, what their main fields are, and even a few potential research topics. Not that you would need to take any one of those, but they're just meant to give you a flavor for what each kind of faculty member might be well suited to try to do. And I wanted to add, this experience to see what research is like. I love that we have Sam and Macy here who have both attested to the fact that having done a thesis has been important for them and what they're going to do next. And what they're going to do next has nothing to do with academia, med school, and investment banking. That said, if you are interested or think you could ever be interested in trying to get a PhD in economics or really any field, or even going back to graduate school for a master's degree, I think doing a senior thesis is pretty much a must do, both because they're going to be looking for that kind of research experience in your record, but also this is your best chance to discern whether this is actually something that's for you or not. So, if you think you might want to get a PhD in economics and you do a senior thesis and you absolutely hate it, that is super important information that will save you a lot of like time and grief down the road.
That's right. Yeah, that's great. I don't know. Chloe gives me these slides. I don't mean to throw her under the bus. I am not like a salesperson. Like I feel like very, very hesitant to tell you like, oh, this is gonna help you like grow as an individual person. But it might. Like I don't know. Like Macy, Sam, what do you think your experiences are?
I feel like it's been like one of the bigger academic challenges that I've had. And again, like the optionality there is like kind of put to the test, I think a little bit, like, what am I capable of?
I would highlight resiliency. That's been a pretty key theme with my thesis. So it kind of like definitely testing persistence and like problem solving ability. Your advisor is there to help, but like a lot of times, it's kind of up to you to like take the initiative when finding data, like trying to work through it yourself. And that's super helpful. Again, even if you're not going into it like a career as an economist, having those problem solving skills will be necessary wherever you go. So
yeah, I'd say like the in grad school was the first time that I was engaged in independent research. And like that was the time where I learned that I could like teach myself stuff. Like it was no longer like, just like being this earned where information was poured into me. Like you really like you have to grapple with these things where it's like, oh no, like I have to like figure this out on my own, and you do, and like that's a very, very empowering thing.
Yeah, and for a lot of you, the next step has been pretty clear since you were small, right? This is something that you do not have to do. You will graduate from Notre Dame without doing this, but if it's something that you commit to, then that's like something you can say, like, I made that choice. I have something that I'm really proud of to show for it at the end. So I'm more on Chloe's side. I think there's a lot of personal growth I've seen students have over the years as they complete a thesis. They make that a goal for themselves. And
I think that's right. I just don't like telling people that. Right? I'm not like confident enough to be like, oh, this is like life-changing for you. Like it might not. So okay, there's also like monetary incentive to do this, or at least to do a good job conditional on doing it. There's a library research award that past thesis writers have won. It includes like both the recognitions like you can put on your resume and also like a monetary prize. Same thing, there's the John H. Sheehan Award for the best senior thesis. Casey has been in the works in terms of like expanding the number of recognitions to current thesis writers. So there'll be some for both the paper and for the poster presentation. So there are recognitions available for this. Also, like the honors designation is something that like, that you'll have on your diploma if you do decide to do that track. Co-authoring, you can speak to this personally.
Yeah, so this is not a common outcome, but it is one, and I think it's happened more for some of our students who are interested in pursuing academia. So if you do a really good thesis that answers an interesting question, there's the potential to publish that. So, you know, you could certainly publish it on your own, but most students, you know, by the time they're done with their thesis, their senior year, are happy to have a faculty member help them get that across the finish line. So these are some of the examples with the student's name in green here of a paper that a senior thesis that resulted in either an academic publication or a working paper that we still hope will turn into one. So my example up there is Shauna Kolka. Her thesis actually started in my economics of the family class as her term paper, and she did that as a junior and liked it enough that she wanted to turn it into a thesis. And it was really a fantastic piece of work that we ended up collaborating on together. So showing how the spacing between kids and their birth order also affected like whether the mom breastfed or got prenatal care, kind of related to Macy's paper. So we put that through the publication process. Shauna is somebody who did want to go into academia. And so, you know, our graduate students are doing really well if they have a publication coming out of graduate school. So the fact that she had one going into graduate school is really pretty impressive.
That's right. So Melanie was just on the market this year or last year?
Last year, yeah.
Got a job at Duke's Business School.
She got her PhD in economics at Stanford, yeah, but she had that one.
Caroline did a 2-year stint at the board, at the Federal Reserve Board in DC, as a research assistant or research associate, and is now applying to grad schools and got into a whole slew of them. So if you do want to be an academic, like that's like maybe the most competent advice I could give is like, if you do want to be an academic, like you should do this for sure. And put a lot into it. What else? You get invited back to Notre Dame after graduation, potentially. We just brought back in, I saw 3 or 4 former international econ students who had done a capstone project earlier today. They were around for a career panel, but we periodically bring people back. There's a undergraduate a research panel. It's going to be at the end of April where we're bringing back some alums and things like that. So that's like something that that comes up. Having your thesis being part of the economics department thesis collection, you will be pushing the frontier forward. You'll be another pebble in this mound of knowledge that we will store on the internet somewhere. Not all of these are like meant to be super influential. Okay.
And Forrest, I don't know if you're going to talk about this now or later, but have you talked about the graduating with honors and what that means and what they have to do that? Yeah, so I guess I'll touch up on this a little bit later, but it's a good time just to mention. So writing a thesis is open to any econ student. Like any of you are welcome to write a thesis. If you received an email from me a week or 2 ago about writing an honors thesis, that means that you either currently qualify GPA-wise or you potentially qualify, depending on like what your grades are in the future, for the honors track. The honors track is going to involve, well, you get something on your diploma that says honors, but it's also going to involve you taking an additional elective at a minimum, participate in the senior honors workshop. Those are kind of the main things. It's really just like it's a designation. It's special chords at graduation, I think. Don't you guys know?
Yeah, I actually did not.
Yeah.
You do not. Don't quote me on that. I think so. We recognize you at our senior thesis or our senior diploma ceremony.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I got chastised today by somebody from the registrar. I was asking a question about our departmental graduation ceremony, and she very quickly emailed me back and said, "You are not allowed to call this a graduation ceremony." So when you all graduate, there is a recognition ceremony for econ majors that happens on the Friday before graduation, and there's a special honors for honor students. Okay, so like one question that comes up is like, like how does this differ from a project you've done in econometrics or a term paper that you've done in one of your electives? You want to?
Yes, so it's much more self-directed and longer is the big key.
The short, easy answer.
Yeah, so you will do it over the course of the entire senior year. The senior thesis workshop takes place in the fall, and that's where we really give you the tools and help everybody kind of get off on the right foot. But the spring semester, you're on your own with your advisor to really bring it across the finish line and turn in the paper. You know, they're typically, I don't know, I want to say like 30 to 50 pages, whereas, you know, a term paper is often more like, you know, 15 or so. Yeah, so it's just a bigger undertaking.
And I'd stress you not to like think that 30 to 50 pages is intimidating for like a year-long project. You know, like with the style of papers that we write in economics with figures and tables and things like that, right? Like 30 pages ends up not being a whole ton of writing, and you have an entire year to do it. So yeah, that's. And
you will have done enough work that like it's just a matter of describing what you did, and that'll take 30 pages before you know it. Yeah.
And you know, there is some emphasis on like originality as well. So with a term paper, I think that there's less sort of like push to like make sure that you're doing something that's entirely new and creative. Whereas like with this, like we really do want you to push the frontier forward in some small, I mean, we all make marginal contributions, right? Like, you know, but in some small fashion. And like, you know, as I was saying, you know, doing this research project, Mason, you said this too, it's like, sometimes you just like have to figure stuff out. Like you're not on your own, you have your faculty advisor, but at the same time, like you're not gonna wanna email them every time that you like
your code breaks.
Get an error in data. Yeah. No, that's right. And so like there is like a lot of like self-guided work. And that's good. Like at the end of the day, it's good for you to like have to beat your head against the wall and like figure some of this stuff out independently. Like that's part of this like developing as a person process. You know, part of the benefits that hasn't, Sam, you touched on it, was sort of like, at the end of the day, like you've taken principles, you've taken the intermediate classes, you've taken stats and metrics, you've taken some electives, like being able to like actually take the things you learned in intermediate micro or econometrics and like apply them for like something you're interested in. It's like super valuable. I'm going to list 3 types of theses here with the sort of with the big asterisk of like most theses only fall into one category. The first is like a theory paper where you are like the entire thing is not data driven at all. Of the current theses, one is, I was going to say
he's working with Tom Gressick.
Yeah, okay, so like 1 or 2 a year is just like a straight theory paper where it's like we have some sort of complicated economic situation. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated, but like at the end of the day, like there's some sort of economic interactions between different types of agents, and like you want to learn more about incentives and things like that. Suppose you're worried about like the risk management of people that are working in banks when like, you know, we move into a different environment in terms of interest rates or whatever, right? And like how those economic parties interact with shareholders versus depositors or whatever it is, right? Like a lot of what we do empirically in economics is a result of people writing down theory papers that are trying to understand the interactions and incentives of different types of agents. That being said, it's a difficult thing to set out and just say like, I'm gonna write a pure theory paper. It's a lot of, it's a less tried and true path than other things. I don't mean to discourage you from doing it by saying that, but it is like a difficult thing. Okay, so goal, improve conceptual underpinnings of analytical tools that economists use to understand and predict phenomena. That is an option. The second option is the one that describes probably 90 to 95% of these topics where it's an empirical paper. You have some sort of question, you're going to find housing data, you're going to find data on maternal outcomes and, you know, regulatory changes in order to kind of like shed some light on something that actually happened. So we're trying to test theories and measure actual relationships in the data. So it could be a model of thinking about like why gentrification occurs. It could be a model of, you know, mothers' incentives, or basically you would do a better job of explaining this than I would. And then at the end of the day, you could also write a combo paper where there is some sort of theoretical section where you could start from some sort of empirical facts, something we observe, and sort of try and think about that through some sort of theoretical model. I have one thesis student that I'm currently working with, Brian Walsh, for those of you who know him, and his paper is very much tied to theory. And so we started off the project by thinking like, okay, let's write down some model of, he's thinking about like worker productivity in an environment where the owners of the firm can decide whether to share that equity with employees or not. And there's been a whole lot of work on terms of like, does employee ownership in equity of a company, like does that affect their productivity? You can write down some principal agent models where you're exploring that. Ultimately, we decided not to go that route, but his paper is certainly motivated by some principal agent labor economics model. And actually, we spent a lot of the fall just like reading those papers just to kind of like hone our thinking about like, what are the things we should be looking for in terms of the data.
And I think some of the macro style papers maybe fall more into this third category too, where they'll have a model that's known. They're not going to really push that forward very far, but they might make like some sort of modification, but then turn and like, you know, see if the data matches the predictions or something.
Are there any questions on this before I like talk about like nitty-gritty logistics of like, you're going to take 2 3 credit hour courses, they're going to count as 40,000 versus whatever. Any questions on? Okay, so if you do a senior thesis, this is the non-honors track. You will enroll in Econ 47970 in the fall and in the spring. We have to approve that. And so basically, if you want to do a senior thesis, basically just reach out to me individually, and then we'll talk about, you know, this matching process with your advisor, and also like I'll give you the override in order to register for these things, conditional on you having an advisor that's going to sign off on whatever that is. The senior honors thesis involves you taking this course with Professor Buckles in the fall. It's Econ 43962. Like, you don't need to write this down or anything like that. Like we'll pass along this information to you. That will be for the fall, and then the spring. The honor or the senior thesis course is Econ 47970. Actually, I think that's a different number now for the honors thesis. But at the end of the day, like what this involves is you taking 2 3 credit hour courses that count as 40,000 level electives and econ write intensive courses. If you're a general econ, are there any international econ majors in here? Okay, so for you, Nick, this would count as one of your electives and the senior research project requirement. For general econ majors, this would count as 2 40,000 level courses, and this would satisfy your write intensive. Starting with Sam's and Macy's class, you also, if you do the honors track, you have to take 5 electives total. So this is where like the counting is like a little bit confusing. So instead of like 4 electives for a general econ major, you have to take at minimum 3 electives plus the 2 3 credit hour courses for the senior honors thesis. One of those 3 electives has to be a 43,000 level course. If you have not taken one already, we strongly encourage you to take one during the fall. That way you're sort of learning some skills that potentially you can use in the spring on your project.
But again, this thesis workshop counts as that 43,000 level, or they have to take an extra?
They have to take another 43,000 level course.
Okay.
Yeah. So this semester, that'd be something like, is anybody in one actually?
Yeah.
What are you guys in, John?
International macro.
International macro.
The empirical development.
Yeah.
Asset pricing. I don't know. But for the how's it
40,000, it's not 43.
Oh,
So the 3 designates it as a write intensive course. And so the other ones are like history of central banking. Gosh,
And other times they're economics of the family and economics of education.
health economics.
Charitable giving, Professor Hunkerman does.
Yeah, there's a wide variety, kind of varies from semester to semester. Let's see. Both of these past senior thesis, senior honors thesis count as your 2 40,000 level econ write intensive courses. They satisfy the RIT. They satisfy the ECWI attribute, which is the econ write intensive. That's a departmental attribute and your university writ requirement. And then for international econ students, this is going to replace the 1 semester senior research project in one of the electives. All right, are there any questions about logistics? About that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I know we emailed about this once, but then for international econ, the additional elective doesn't apply, right?
Right, that's correct. Yeah. Basically what I just said, senior thesis opportunity is open to all econ and international econ majors, honors destinations, yet satisfy a GPA requirement, either A- in the core courses or an A- in the core courses, plus stats and the principles. Yet take an additional electives, so 5 total, 3 electives plus 2 thesis courses, how you satisfy the minimum requirements. There's an application on the website that's due April 24th. You do not have to have a thesis advisor by then, but we would strongly encourage you to have a thesis advisor by then. And we'll talk about specifically about how to go about that. Also, if you're in Glenn, Sheedy, any other program, sustainability, any of these other programs that require a year-long thesis, basically, like, we don't want to discourage you as a university, like, we don't want to discourage you from like doing this, right, a senior thesis. And so like we've figured out ways to like make all these things complementary. If you are Glenn, if you are any of these things, like feel free just like to ask me later about like what the process looks like, and I'm happy to kind of share information about that. Okay, so finding a topic and a thesis advisor. So Sam, you said you're sort of taking economics of housing with Evan Mast, and then that sort of connected you with this. Macy, you were looking like you sort of like looked through people's CVs, resumes. That's sort of the another very common way of doing this. The third most common way of doing this is what Professor Buckles referred to is like we have this like this spreadsheet that basically lists all the potential faculty members and like 2 to 3 potential topics by faculty member that we'll share with you. And like that can be another kind of easy way. Even just it's a good thing to reference in terms of thinking like what would a feasible question look like. So the SAM's 40,000 level elective or writing intensive class you've previously taken, talking to faculty and looking at their websites, topics database. Feel free to email Professor Buckles if you'd like access to that. Those are kind of the main paths. And like it's perfectly fine for you just to like send a cold email to some faculty member and say, you know, I'm a rising senior studying economics. I've looked at your CD. Everything you've done is incredibly interesting and important. Like something, I'd say something nice, and then say like, you know, with varying levels of specificity, right? You can say like, I'm interested in doing something with like maternal health care and policy, or like, I'm interested in health. You know, you should think like the more kind of you put into drilling down on like the specificity, you're in some sense, like if you align with the faculty member, you're improving your odds of a match. But at the end of the day, like that's costly to you as well. So you can also think about like another strategy is to cast a wide net and say, you know, email a bunch of faculty and figure out like whatever matches. I don't have any particular advice on like what the right way to approach that is.
Yeah, so I would say I wouldn't start with a wide net because faculty are busy, you know, and so we don't want a bunch of people emailing a bunch of faculty. We want to try and be a little bit more intentional about your potential match. And a good thing to request, first of all, is not to just come out right and say, will you be my advisor, but just to say, can I meet with you for like 15 minutes to tell you what I'm interested in and talk about the possibility of you advising my thesis, you know, because they don't know, especially if you don't have a pre-existing relationship, they probably would like to meet you and hear a little bit more before they also commit to working with you for the next year. And I always try to tell people, you know, this is a process of trying to find a good match. So I will tell students no, and it's not because I don't like the student or I don't think that they are capable of writing a great thesis, but it just works best if it's something that's aligned with my interests. And so I will always help a student that I say, you know, I don't think I'm a great fit for this, but here's who is, and I'll put them in contact with a faculty member or something, you know, so don't take it personally if the faculty member says that, you know, this isn't maybe a good match. And they might also say no because, we encourage our faculty not to take on too many of these. You know, each one of these that I teach is basically like a half class, at least in the spring semester, because I'm meeting with the students regularly, just helping solve problems, intervening on Macy's behalf with the university, contracts office because they won't approve her restricted data, So, we try not to take on too many. We encourage, especially our assistant professors, not to take on too many. So for that reason, if there is somebody that you're really set on, you probably want to try and contact them sooner, within the next a month or so, just so they don't get overfilled with other thesis writers already.
Yeah, I think that's an underrated point, which is like you are not in competition with each other for senior thesis advisors, but if you let the process drag out and you decide like, oh, it turns out I'm really interested in economics of the family and health, and I want to work with Professor Buckles, and she's already committed to 2 or 3 students by then. Like it's just like you've given up that window. So this is something that you want to kind of think about moving forward with relatively quickly. Okay. So in terms of next steps, find a topic, a thesis advisor. You can apply, you do need to apply online if you want to do the honors track. And that's a very simple application. It's like, tell us what your grades are, or whether some of them are pending, tell us who your advisor is. It won't take you any time at all, but it's like our way of sort of keeping track of all this stuff. Deadline for that, I think it's a Friday, is April 24th. Again, like you don't have to have an advisor by then, but it'll make your life easier if you're really set on doing this, if you do have by then. And then I'll pass along information about how to register for that fall workshop. Registration probably is before April 24th for rising seniors. And so feel free to email me and say, hey, I'm interested in doing the honors track. What I'll probably respond to you say is like, once this thing clears, I'll give everybody approvals to register for this thing. Don't worry, it's not going to fill up. Okay.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that again too, because I feel like I always get a few people kind of panicking.
Yeah.
If you want to do the thesis, there will be a spot for you. We will want you to sign up just so we can plan for how many folks there are going to be. But if it comes and goes, the registration deadline, and you have not gotten it on your schedule, do not worry. It's not going to be constrained.
Yep. Okay. And then this is just a little plug for the fall workshop. Okay, if you're a sophomore in here, there are things that you can do to kind of help facilitate this process. You can like take an econ writing intensive course sooner rather than later, try and work as an RA, whether that's for Leo or independently with faculty members. If you're interested in being an RA, I send out an email every semester or prior to the beginning of a new semester where I try and solicit labor supply for TAs and research assistants, graders, private tutors, stuff like that. Just keep an eye on like those random newsletters that I send out. I'll be linking one of them. There are some funding opportunities that, it's difficult for you to know at this point, like, am I gonna need funding? So I will say, like, if at the end of the day, like, you do need funding, suppose you find that out in the fall of your senior year, like we can work to try and figure out ways to get funding for that. You don't really need to kind of be thinking about this right now, unless you have something very specific that you want to do. That's it. Questions? Yeah, Matt.
Can you give us like a general timeline that you'd expect me to follow in writing your thesis?
In terms of like during your senior year?
Yeah.
I can do that. Yeah, I have a very specific one that I give to my students, my advisees, and then generally share with the students in the workshop. So try and find your advisor in the spring semester, usually by April. And you and your advisor want to use the remainder of that semester, but really the summer, to try to narrow in on a topic. So it's over that spring and summer that I will say, you know, here's a paper that's kind of close to what you're talking about, read it and then use it as a way to like branch out into other papers that cite it, or so it'll just be kind of reading, and we might check in over emails a bit over the summer as you go through that process. I usually have the goal of trying to settle on a pretty specific topic by Labor Day of your fall semester. Now, sometimes we miss that goal, or sometimes we choose a topic and it turns out that it's not going to work and you like have to pivot by fall break or something, but that's a good goal to have in mind, is a pretty specific topic around Labor Day. And then over the course of the fall semester, for most of the students that are writing a paper that does involve data, we really try to make sure that you get the data that you need and get it cleaned, so that, you know, my goal is by the end of the fall semester, you can at least produce like really good summary statistics and some like motivating trends and figures. And then that leaves the spring semester for doing the real analysis and writing the paper. I tell my students to have the goal of doing it by spring break, because when you're a second semester senior, the last thing you want to be doing is like coming back from spring break or spending some of your spring break writing your thesis, which is what Macy did. She stayed on campus and wrote some of her thesis her spring break of her senior year. That was her choice. It wasn't.
That's a tough sell from like senior thesis.
She didn't have to do that, but that was her choice to do that. But yeah, it's a good goal to try to have a good draft of your paper by spring break of your senior year. And then the deadline is this year, April 14th. So you kind of have a month on the other side of spring break to pull it together. We have a poster session. Forrest alluded to this, but where we get everybody together, you present your results, and we'll have a prize for like the best poster and things. And that'll take place like at the end of April.
Right. You know, I hope most of you do it, but if you don't decide to, if you decide it's not for you, like we certainly don't want to encourage people to do it where this is not a good fit. So just sort of like, you know, you have better information about that than anybody else. We good?
And I have always had a couple of students drop out of the workshop. And as long as that doesn't affect your graduation requirements, which it shouldn't for most people because it's like kind of an extra thing. As long as it doesn't affect your graduation requirements, that's totally fine.
Feel free to email me if you have any specific questions. Get this, whatever. We'll also post this video on the website. I'll try and remember to do that tonight. Take some pizza with you, please. Other than that, like, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for coming. How is it going?